Good evening or morning. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm here to talk with you about astrology in general, but Vedic astrology in particular. And I'd like to talk to you in particular about the month of June. June is getting a lot of attention lately. That's why I want to talk about it. It isn't because summer's here and everybody's happy that summer's here and all the kids are off school. It's mainly because there are supposed to be a lot of nasty planetary combinations occurring in June. So everyone and their sister, brother, cousin, nephew, at least in my greater community of astrologers, and there are a great many of us, believe me, are going on and talking about really, they're ranging all the way one from dire catastrophes to essentially unsettling situations, to minor tragedies, to a variety of mishaps starting in June and probably continuing pretty much through August. Now, I've spoken about this topic before on this show, and what we're going to do every month, I'm planning on putting out basically 2, maybe 3 shows a month if I'm lucky, or presentations a month if I'm lucky. But basically, what I've noticed is that ever since 9/11, that is the bombings in New York, a lot of astrologers miss that. Not everybody, but a lot of astrologers miss that. So whenever they see similar combinations coming together, they start suddenly getting very, very worried. And right now, and this is a planetary influence as well, right now there's sort of a mode of thinking within the astrological community. This is writ large. This isn't individual astrologers, so individual astrologers will differ with one another. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite expressions, or one of my favorite quotes, is that Lord Shiva cursed astrologers so they wouldn't agree with each other. So there's always that tenet of astrology. So I'll have a different take from my fellow astrologer. He or she will have a different take from their fellow astrologer, and you'll see refinements going all the way down the line. But I think one of the reasons this particular transit is so troubling is they're seeing certain parallels between things like events like Pearl Harbor, the 9/11 attacks, and also other basic catastrophes or basic upsets to order that have happened in the world. Now, there are a lot of very legitimate reasons. And the other part, by the way, I want to skip back, and I hate when I do that, when I see people do this on TV, and I apologize for doing it to you or in videos. The other part of lectures will be basic astrology, but this is what's called mundane astrology, or looking at world predictions and looking at events. It's like, as one of my students says, an astrological forecast. An astrological weather forecast. So when you have these kinds of things come up, these difficult planetary combinations, it's rather easy to jump to the worst possible conclusion. And it's not, it's very understandable. Saturn and K2 are in Sagittarius in Indian astrology. They would be in Capricorn in Western astrology. And both of those signs are connected with established orders or ways of doing things. But for Vedic astrology, in Western astrology, it would be more dangerous to political institutions. And in Vedic astrology, it would be more catastrophic or difficult for belief systems, churches. We've already seen a variety of church bombings that took place when Mars was aspecting that Saturn K2 combination. It's still aspecting that Saturn K2 combination in the chart, by the way. And essentially people will tend to say, well, this happened here and this happened there, but there are also other combinations which are much better than when those other events occurred. So essentially what happens when you have these kinds of charts, these kinds of catastrophic charts, and one thing we'll do is we'll do mundane, then we'll do mechanics of astrology in other classes and other sessions. That's what I was trying to get to before. So this will be what's called mundane or predictive astrology and astrological weather forecast. The other one will be essentially the mechanics of how astrology works, and basically whether or not this chart goes with that chart, or how to use different charts. So in this one we're going to focus on the overall astrological weather. So the overall astrological weather forecast is frightening to a lot of people. You can't see it. I have my computer to my side, but we have Saturn and Ketu in Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is connected with, to a certain extent, is connected with religious institutions and higher knowledge. So you're seeing a lot of things happen, like institutions of higher education having major problems. There being major issues with their finances. So just for an example, Hampshire College is going through a major economic crisis right now, and they're reformatting. Now this is not new. This is a lot of colleges have been going through similar situations for quite a few years. Hampshire's a well-known school, is considered a very experimental school, has very lofty ambitions, etc., etc. So it fits all those things. You're also seeing a lot of things happening, like the fires at Notre Dame, that's horrible series of bombings and disasters that happen in churches, the shootings, and these things tend to pile up in people's minds. And Sagittarius is also connected with travel. That's the ninth house, the natural ninth house of the zodiac. Does that mean that everybody can't travel when Saturn and Ketu are in Sagittarius? Well, that's not true. That's an oversimplification of a chart. Basically, everybody has a different chart, more or less. You may have a person who, and you find them, and as an astrologer, you look for much more detail in a chart than let's say, the sun sign or the day you were born. But those people will have different ninth houses, which is a house of travel. They'll have different houses of higher knowledge, and those houses may be in pretty good shape. There may not be a lot of negative things going on. What may happen, though, is, let's say if a person's a Gemini rising, they may be having a lot of problems in their marriage, and a lot of anger about it. Okay, so that's what's happening with Gemini. Gemini and Sagittarius, Eastern Gemini and Sagittarius are in very tough shape right now because of that mutual aspect of Mars, Rahu, Saturn, and Ketu. Does that mean their entire lives are going to be horrible? No. And I'll tell you what really determines when these things activate. Number one, the planets are not on top of each other right now. They're close. Saturn's at 25 degrees, 46 minutes, and Ketu's at 24 degrees, 18 minutes. If we use a different measurement for Ketu, which we can do, Ketu's a little bit further away from Saturn. So Saturn's restriction is denial, is poverty, is misery, and Ketu is a very destructive or very disorienting planet. So one of the things that Ketu can do, actually, though, is it can tear down outmoded structures. It can actually make people more interested in their liberation or freedom. So you'll probably see a lot more activity connected with people trying to throw off oppressive regimes, efforts to combat that on the part of oppressive regimes. So what we see happening in Venezuela and Turkey right now, you have some kind of a conflict over who can take power, right? So that's a Saturn K2 combination. And in places like North Korea and Iran, you're seeing threats of violence. Now, Mars and Rahu and Ketu, when they're in this configuration, don't actually generate violence. They threaten it, but they never generate it. And I'll tell you why. Mars is with Rahu. Rahu is a fear-inducing planet. It has strong desires and ambitions. It wants to have weapons. When Mars is with Rahu, it's going to desire to have this power and this command. But the 9/11 attacks, Mars was with K2. So Mars with K2 tends to, quote unquote, force destruction, because Mars, it's like having two Mars in a chart or two K2s in a chart. They're very destructive entities. The mutual aspect is not quite so bad. I'm not saying it's great, but it's not quite so bad. And that's where Mars and K2 are right now. They're mutually aspecting each other. They're not conjoined. They're not in the same sign. They were in the same sign in the 9/11 attack. Mercury is also a planet which triggers plans and actions, and Mercury will be moving into into Gemini within about a week or so. It'll be in its own sign. So that's considered actually a good thing, because Mercury in Gemini is a more social planet. It's not a cold and calculating planet. Mercury was in Virgo when the 9/11 attacks occurred. So it's not going to be as much of a trigger because Mercury is not really, it's more social, it's more willing to talk. There'll be threats, there'll be worry, there'll be anxiety, but there won't be catastrophe, at least from where I'm sitting. The other thing that you always look at in a chart is to find out, and forgive my eyes for wandering to the screen because I'm trying to see when planets are changing. Venus within about 10 days will enter Taurus. What that's going to do is produce a nice Jupiter-Venus trine. So trines are, just to explain a technical term, a trine is basically, an opposition is 180 degrees. A circle consists of 360 degrees, right? That's basic math. An opposition is a 1/7 aspect. So they're opposing each other, their intention. A trine is a 120 degree aspect. 120 degrees is considered an easy aspect. And we have the two most benefic planets in an astrology chart, Jupiter and Venus, essentially trining each other. Venus, as a matter of fact, is being aspected. In Vedic astrology, Jupiter throws aspects 5, 7, and 9 signs, 5, 7, and 9 signs away. So Jupiter will be aspecting Taurus. It's in Scorpio right now. It'll be aspecting Taurus. It'll be aspecting, also aspecting Pisces, and it'll also be aspecting Cancer. So all these combinations would tend to make me believe that we'll have like these very, very aggressive negotiations for a few days, then people will back off. So it'll essentially be an emotional roller coaster. And I want to look at something else as well that I use in charts, and I'll show it to you at some point. But there's a system called astrocartography or astromapping. And in astromap, essentially what it does is essentially the planets are in declination to the Earth. They cast an aspect right on the Earth. It doesn't matter whether I'm using a tropical or Western astrological system or an Eastern astrological system. The planets are going to be in the same place. So the entire factor about the different zodiacs doesn't matter in this particular system. And I'm looking at where Saturn is landing, and and Rahu are landing over Spain and the UK and parts of Africa. Mars is landing on the East Coast, so we know there's going to be political friction. The East Coast of the United States, excuse me. So we know there's going to be political friction in the U.S. over the next few months. So that's just a given. We have people who want to impeach the president, but they don't know how to do it without damaging themselves. And we have a president who's very stubborn and won't admit to doing anything at all wrong. So essentially, we have a stalemate, and we have people who are going to get mad at each other and angry at each other. But Mars with Rahu creates frustration. It doesn't create action. The other thing that we're looking at, so we're looking at these dangerous planets in the chart, and they are dangerous. I'm not undercutting them. It looks like both England's going to go through a disruption, so we know that in June there's going to be an election. Oh, what a surprise! So we have an election coming up in June. They might not even get the candidate they think they're going to get, because it's possible, at least from what I'm seeing in the chart, if we have a Saturn-Rahu conjunction, it's possible you may see the first Labour Prime Minister in a long time. Okay, so I'm going on record with that. I could be wrong. The UK is an unusual place, but basically, if that happens, that will be essentially a Saturn-Rahu conjunction manifesting, and essentially, in places like India, there's a swath with Saturn and Rahu passing right through the country. So India is going to have some tough times with either terror attacks or with attacks on the government, or with people essentially there are already allegations that the government that the elections were rigged, which I find hard to believe given the incredible majority that Prime Minister Modi got. But